The following is an interview with Senator Gerard Rennick, including a radio interview on Radio Fremantle 107.9 FM.
So, in some respects, the left have gone too far, in my view, certainly with the transgender stuff. We'll find out with the Voice, even though the Voice seems to be trending towards no. We'll wait until the night of the election, the referendum, to confirm if that's true or not. But, I'm not going to tolerate the Wets in my party backing the Voice or the transgender issue and saying we should turn a blind eye to it, when also believe that all people are, equal. There's only one race, the human race. I don't see how these values accord with the Liberal Party, and it's time the Wets, if they don't. It's not that this makes it any better, but in my lifetime, I've seen an entire country invaded Iraq and bombed for 10 years. These people lost their houses and all sorts of things, right? So, and no one's apologised to them either. And there's warfare, there's, countries in Africa racked by civil war, there's, other people. So we've lived in a golden age, and we've taken it for granted. It's been a long time, since World War II, and, the West has been pretty safe for the last 70 years, but, it's only sort of one bad government away from, losing a lot. So, hang in there, be constructive. As I say to people, you can march around the street on a Saturday afternoon all you like, but it's not going to solve the problem. You need to be in the boardroom during the weekdays to solve the problem. You can share as many posts you like on social media, but yet again, 12 hours on social media is not going to achieve anything.
It's not changing policy, is it?
It's not changing policy. Spend 8 hours on social media and a couple of hours in a political party, preferably with a coalition, and improve it. Turn up to the meetings, because if you're a member of the party and you vote in the pre-selection, you can, there might be 200 in an FEC or an FDC. Your vote's only worth 1 in 200. Whereas if you vote in the general federal election, there's 100,000 people in an electorate, right? And often it's too late by the time the name's on the ballot, because a lot of seats are safe seats. So you want to control who is actually representing the party, so that when they go to Canberra, they stand up for what they say they believe in. When they come back here to Western Australia, for example, they say they believe in this here, and then they go to Canberra and they roll over. Then when they come back here, if you're in the party, you can do something about it. I mean, you only get a pre-selection every 3 years, but you can still turn up to party meetings and give them a good gobful. 4 major banks had $8 billion in foreign debt in 1985. By 2008, they had $800 billion in foreign debt. Where was that money lent to? Where did the banks lend that money to? So they went offshore, got the $800 billion in foreign debt, and we pay interest on that $800 billion in foreign debt, and they don't have to pay tax. And they went and lent it to people for houses, right? So what that did was drive up the price of houses from 4 to 5 times earnings to 12 to 13 times earnings. Yep. And what did that do? Sent 2 parents back to work. Yep. And what did that do? Yep, destroyed the family. What's happened to our education system in the last 30 years? Where's Australia's ranking on that, gone from the top down, right? So, don't care whether you're male or female, but ideally we're going to have one parent at home for as long as possible, because logistically you don't need to be a rocket scientist to know that kids have to do their homework, they have to be read to, they have to learn to do their chores, right? That's discipline, right? We need to keep an eye in the atmosphere by 100 parts per million, which is effectively a 10,000, 1 10,000, so 10 to the 6 over 10 to the 2, 1 10,000 over 287 degrees Kelvin, so that temperature is expressed in Kelvin, 15 degrees Celsius plus 272, is 0.00287. So for every 100 parts per million that CO2 increases in the atmosphere, you're going to increase the temperature of the Earth by 0.03 degrees. So given that the temperature, if you believe what you read, that the carbon dioxide's increased from 280 parts per million to 420 parts per million in the last 150 years, so we've increased the temperature by 0.04 degrees, that's a pretty small price to pay to bring 6 billion people out of poverty, don't you think? And industrialise. Absolutely. And it's just, if you know through photosynthesis, it's pretty much plant food anyway. And there was another article in the ABC just after the bushfires in 2020 when the plankton, the phytoplankton bloomed in the Southern Ocean because of that extra carbon that went into the ocean. So we've got natural stabilisers on Earth anyway because of this wonderful, the true renewable energy, which of course is photosynthesis. And that is free, and that's a natural stabiliser on Earth. And what we also know is that renewables aren't renewables, and that solar panels and wind farms and all of that stuff, transmission lines and batteries, and some of that stuff on the edge, we use solar panels out in our property in Western Queensland for bores, right? There are times when some of this stuff serves a purpose, but on an industrial scale, it just isn't going to work. And it's incredibly deceptive of these people to say that renewables are cheaper or good for the environment, because they're not. Look, I'm sure I suspect many of you follow me, my views on climate change and renewables. And still, and I'm very glad to say I wish we'd have done this in the last term of government, but we do support nuclear, which I think is a great idea as well. But I still support coal and gas as well, because it's cheap, reliable baseload power. And finally, and I won't insult your intelligence by talking about this for too long, but the whole transgender stuff that's being forced on our children at schools is wrong. Look, I'm not saying that children from time to time don't have issues about whoever, whatever. We have to learn from the mistakes of the past, and we have to be prepared to have the courage of our convictions, and not only the courage of our convictions, we have to have confidence in our own intelligence, right?
Honourable Senator Gerard Rennick, who gave his first speech to Parliament on the 10th of September in 2019. And he talks about self-belief, into adversity into opportunity, gratitude to our forefathers. He's an amazing man. He's one of the few politicians who actually were asking for, what's going on about people who are vaccine injured, and really getting down to the nitty-gritty of the statistics that were coming out, that actually the West Australian government had really accurate statistics. And so he's questioned people in Parliament as well about this. And he's the son of a farmer from Chinchilla, 290 kilometres west of Brisbane. Yeah, so he also talks about it's time that universities underwrote the student debt instead of that coming from taxpayers, I think. Cost of foreign students using infrastructure funded by taxpayers. They can work up to 20 hours a week and they're competing with unemployed Australians. I think he also believes that perhaps we've got too much of an increase in immigration, and he talks about it's not being really that good for our country. Lots of things I could ask him, but I'm only going to have a short time. So we'll see. Leading up to that, if you want to find out more about him, just go to his Facebook page. Look him up, Gerard Rennick. He's challenged the government on all levels. And that's what a lot of politicians, I find, have not been doing. A lot of them are just yes people and they want to keep their jobs. Gerard Rennick will be on soon. Okay, well, let's go. Gerard, you're over here in Western Australia. I'm very excited to interview you, but I've got all these questions in front of me. But I wanted to start off with, first of all, that you're the son of a farmer from Chinchilla.
Yeah, so I grew up on a farm just outside of a small town, Chinchilla, which is about 300 kilometres west of Brisbane.
Yeah.
Very similar to the town I'm in today, actually, Beverley, which is in its mixed farming community with lots of cropping and pastoral. And in the last 2 decades, we've had a lot of gas wells come in as well.
Okay.
So, there's a bit of gas in the small town as well. My mum was a midwife in Chinchilla.
Yeah.
One of 4 midwives there in the 70s and 80s. And, of course, unfortunately, like a lot of towns, we've lost our maternity ward, despite the fact that the town's twice as big as what it was back in the 70s and 80s because of the gas fields. And we've also got Kogan Creek Power Station just outside the town as well. With 400 million tonnes of coal reserves, of course, which the Queensland government won't use. They'd rather import renewables and send money offshore rather than keep money onshore. But anyway.
So you're over here you told me earlier it was something to do with banking, or is it a lot more than that?
No, it's just banking. So I'm on the Regional Rural Aviation and Transport Committee, which is a Senate committee, and we look into various issues regarding regional affairs, rural affairs, aviation and transport.
Mm-hmm.
And the banks have been closing a lot of branches in regions. So we, with the help of my colleague, Senator Matt Canavan, we managed to get inquiry into the closure of branches by the big banks, or mainly the big banks, out in regional centres. So that's going for a year, and it'll finish up in December. But this week we're in Western Australia, and yesterday we were in Cunnamulla, and today we're in Beverley, and we're just hearing from...
I heard you say Cunnamulla, yeah. And you're going to be talking tonight. So you're coming in tonight, you're going to be...
Yeah, so the inquiry finishes at 3, and I'll drive straight into the event tonight, and then I'll book into a hotel after that.
Oh.
And then I'm going to do a second event tomorrow night as well before I fly out on the red eye, and then drive 600 kilometres on Friday back home in Queensland to an event out in regional Queensland. But
oh wow,
yeah,
you're very busy. So you're one of a few senators who actually have questioned the government on things like the vaccine mandates. And one of the questions I had was, how do you get your resilience when you've actually, where people, so the word I would use would be so nasty, or so they quite like to vilify people in politics. How do you build your resistance?
Part of the, that's part of it. Look, that's something that you've got to be prepared for when you go into politics. I got a part of my resilience as a Senate candidate when the ABC tried to do a pylon for about 4 days, and they basically wanted to get me thrown off the ticket. And they criticised me for my climate change views. I've always been against forcing children into childcare. I think parents should have the choice as to the type of childcare they want, not necessarily sending them to a childcare or daycare centre, but rather let parents stay home or have a nanny come home or pay the grandparents to look after it.
So you actually looked after your kids for 4 years or something, did you?
Yeah. So I sort of got to 45 and thought, well, my mum passed away, and I thought, well, I don't want to get to 60 and look back and think, well, I never had a crack. So at the time, I was in a fortunate position because my wife's former employee wanted her to go back to work, and I said, well, look, you go back. She was fortunate enough she could work from home, and she's been very successful in her career, and now she's obviously given it up to support me in my career again. I looked after the two young boys at the time. We ended up having a third child, a daughter, as well, but that was great. I'd rather encourage a parent to stay at home in the child's early years than this sort of benchmark now that we have to count how many people have gone back into the workforce, rather than we should. And that's come at the expense of education and our decline in education standards across the world. And I think that the key aspect that we should be looking at is how well prepared are our children to deal with the future challenges they may face. And the whole reason why I got into politics was that I wanted to make sure our children get the same opportunities that our forefathers gave to us. And I believe the model that we used to have, whereby we protected our sovereign industries, owned our infrastructure, and we had our families and individuals were much more empowered than they are today, was the model, rather than what we're seeing now in the last 30 or 40 years. We've seen government sell all those services, privatise all the services that they should be delivering to the people, and then they turned around and marched on into the family home, the classroom, the bedroom, the doctor's waiting room, the corporate boardroom, and our farmlands, telling people how to live their lives and run their businesses. And that's just wrong. I mean, it's all upside down. I mean, the role of government is to serve the people, not control the people. And yet, in the last 40 years, it's been turned on its head where the people are now being controlled by the government. And I'm going to push back against that. I'm fortunate when you become a senator, you're given 6 years. As a senator. So I made a decision early on, well, I'm just going to go for broke for 6 years. I wasn't forced to take the vaccine as well. I mean, I actually owned shares in an mRNA technology company before going into politics and studied science briefly. So I had some idea of the technology being used.
So can I ask you, were politicians mandated?
Well, they weren't. The federal politicians weren't mandated. Most federal politicians did get the jab. And I think in some state parliaments they may have been mandated.
Right, okay.
But we weren't mandated federally, and I certainly wasn't going to be told what to do. I mean, I'm an accountant by trade, and, it peeved me back in when Tony Abbott became Prime Minister that they blocked accountants from giving financial advice. Now, quite frankly, I'm not into anyone paid financial advice because no one can predict the future. But my view was, well, if I, as an accountant, can't give financial advice, and my only financial advice I ever give is pay your house off as quickly as possible, because if you own a house, at least you've got a house roof over your head. But I'm certainly not going to start giving medical advice. And, all these politicians and media personalities and everything like that were running around saying, get the jab, it's safe and effective. And it's like, well, my children, my eldest is allergic to penicillin, my other son's allergic to pecans and walnuts, and my daughter's allergic to nickel. Everyone's an individual, and we've got to let people make their own health choices. It's just that simple. It's it's between the patient and the doctor, and that's a sacred. I don't want to get when I say sacred, get too over the top, but it's an individual choice that needs to be respected, and we just can't have governments and especially when it was off the back of such a contrived fear campaign. Look, for what it's worth, and I know some people disagree with me on this, I do think there was a virus out there or some sort of pathogen and people were getting sick and that older people were definitely vulnerable. But I don't think the response was that we shut the country down for 2 years and lock up people, healthy people, the working age population, stop them from working and stop our children from going to school. I mean, man has always lived with viruses for thousands of years, if not hundreds of thousands of years.
Yeah.
And, you know, this one was no different, albeit it may have been a little bit more severe than your average virus. I won't necessarily dispute that. But, well, I had it, and I mean, I had it for a couple of days and then a raspy throat at night, probably a week after I had the two, you know, heavy days. And look, you know, I had the flu probably about 10 years ago as well. I thought the one that I had, well, let's call it COVID, the COVID variant was stronger than what I had 10 years ago. But, you know, I recovered in 2 days, bar the raspy throat, and then by, you know, sort of 2 weeks after, I was pretty much back to normal. Yeah, maybe at a microscopic level, maybe something happened to my tissues. I don't know. But
so tonight, will you be talking on The Voice, the No Vote, or will you be what would you be talking on?
I generally don't. I mean, I'll take it from Q&A. I mean, it's The Voice to me. It's just obviously a no. You know, it's a Trojan horse. Where's one race, the human race? Quite frankly, I just wish Albanese would announce the date and get on with it, because it's a distraction from the real issues of cost of living, you know, providing services, the desperate need for better services from government, especially at the state level. You know, our health system and our education system and our police forces and all of that, you know, they're all struggling for various reasons, including the mandate. And that's the stuff we should be talking about. I mean, the Voice is just divisive, sorry. And it'll be a hammer looking for a nail. Like, this will be the thin edge of the wedge. And you can be sure that once the Voice is in and there's a permanent voice to Parliament, they'll then start on about treaty and reparation. So it's a big no from me. But I find the Voice, you know, I mean, look, it's just a straight out no for me. But I'll be talking about, obviously, things that I'm sort of probably a lot of people aren't aware of, which is our tax system and how that's designed to encourage foreign investment over domestic investment, and monetary policy, which is no one has, you know, very little people understand monetary policy, our bureaucracy / federation, and the diabolical mess that's in, you know, I don't need to tell you, between the states and the federal government, and just the duplication of bureaucracies. And then I'll talk a little bit about what I call the red meat issues, which is obviously COVID, climate change, and our children. And then I'll take some Q&A from the floor for about 45 minutes.
I look forward to it. We've almost run out of time now. So the Maori, I just want it quickly about Maori. Do you think that fires there, is that possible to be man-made?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, look, quite possibly it was deliberate arson. But you know, I can't speak to what caused it or the motive or anything like that. I have no idea.
Oh, that was just I just threw something in there. Well, thank you so much once again for this very quick, short interview, and I loved having you on, and I will be seeing you tonight sometime. And, yeah, good luck with the rest of your tour here and with the rest of your senatorship, and hopefully that you will get back on that ticket and you'll be on their pre-selection.
Okay, cheers. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thanks, bye.
Bye.
Yes, you've been listening to an interview with Senator Gerard Rennick from Queensland, Australia. If you'd like to hear more about this, there's another 18 minutes after this. So if you want to hear more detail about the interview that we did with him in August 2023, how does it get any better than this? I'm Mary-Lucille Baker.
Information, disinformation bill. Well, it won't be Labor and the Greens, my understanding of it, is backing it. So it's the crossbenchers that you need to get to. So you don't want to get to the David Paycocks, the Lydia Thorpes of the world, and the Jackie Lambys. You'll obviously need Jackie. So basically, to block anything nowadays, you need the Coalition to block it, One Nation to block it, the Jackie Lambie Party to block it, Lydia Thorpe and David Pocock to block it. And David Van, he's now independent as well. So all of those people have to turn up in the chamber and vote no to stop it from happening. Yeah, I mean, they you know, they're driven by the profit motive, so they were being paid to advertise the vaccines, and a part of the condition with, you know, if you're going to advertise the vaccines, you can't trash talk the vaccines at the same time. That was my understanding of the advertising contracts. So they do what they do. They sell ads. That's what it's all about for them. And look, to be fair, most people early on when they were told it was a vaccine, believe what the government said. I mean, normally vaccines are pretty benign. Yes, there's people who do get injured by a vaccine, but nowhere near the rate at what they got injured with the COVID vaccine. And they generally last decades. I mean, no one's running around with mumps and measles and rubella, right? But when the issue is when it became apparent, step one, that there were injuries, they needed to stop, especially when it was young people being injured at very low risk with the vaccine. And then so that was sort of September, October 21, maybe November. Some people, these things sort of disseminated slowly because there was so much censorship of it. But then in the 2022. Everyone caught COVID who was vaccinated anyway. So
that's right.
And then they're still trying to this day and try and say the vaccines were safe and effective. I mean, about mainstream media. I mean, so this this is a long story, and I'll try and talk about it tonight if we get the time. But ultimately, this comes back to the centralised wealth in the world, right? So in Australia now we have $3.5 trillion locked up in superannuation. About 2.8 of that is controlled by industry and retail funds. So when you control $2.8 trillion in capital, you control industry. And if you control industry, you control media, because media relies on industry for advertising, right? And it's so much cross-ownership. So the same people that own, say, for example, in the States, NBC also own Big Pharma. You know what I mean? So, they're not going to bag out, So the conflicts of interest and the cross-ownership make it very difficult to have genuine independent news. And likewise, in the case of the vaccine rollout, the media also received lots of advertising dollars from the government to advertise the vaccines, and in lieu of other advertising, because everything else was shut down. So they became very dependent on the government for their advertising. I think and I'll stand to be corrected on this, but the government is probably the biggest advertiser of in the media, and if they're not the biggest, they're certainly one of the biggest. Now there's enough evidence. It's the coercion and censorship isn't as strong now as what it was 2 years ago. So, and APRA have got a fair bit of egg on their face over that 9th of March statement, and I think even the social media companies and a lot of other people are sort of maybe, I don't know that they're that sheepish about it, because in politics these people just never admit they're wrong, right? Climb the top of these large organisations, they get there because they're ruthless. So they're not necessarily going to come out and say they were wrong, but I don't think they push as hard as they used to. Yeah.
Thank you.
We need more people in the medical community to speak out, but obviously, we need it to be coordinated and organised, so when they do, they don't lose their jobs. The World Health Organisation is a hammer looking for a nail, like a lot of bureaucracies. They're going to jump on anything that happens to, justify their existence. So there's a natural instinct. And I mean, like all bureaucracies, it'll be like the voice, right? It'll become a hammer looking for a nail. So if you've got a permanent organisation there that gets paid to turn up to work every week, and, let's just say Friday afternoon they get treaty, they're going to come back in Monday morning and go, right, what do we do now? And so it's the same for the health bureaucrats, right? They had to, they have to keep pushing, they had to push the narrative, or, that they couldn't believe how much power they were given. So it's like, I don't know if you've ever been to a nightclub or a pub, and a bouncer somebody decides, you can't come in. You're standing there in a queue and they go, they can't come in. Well, it's that sort of bouncer mentality that some people, they just let power go to their heads, and that's, any bureaucracy. There's, and if you follow me in estimates, you can see there's a lot of, it's not just in the health department, it's the Bureau of Meteorology, it's the SRO, the RBA, don't want to answer questions, have a contemptuous view of senators asking questions and things like that. So, elephant in the room here is no one's actually wanting to investigate how COVID came about, whether or not it was a result of gain of function or not. And initially when it broke out, I know one of my colleagues who was at the time the Foreign Minister called for investigations into the origins of coronavirus. Prime Minister Albanese has said he was going to have a Royal Commission into it and the government handling of it, and he's now, crab walking away saying we're not, it's not time, time's not right. I don't know why the time wouldn't be right, given that we should do it when it's still fresh in our minds rather than a decade's time. But I mean, but this is the power of worldwide media now. You can coordinate a message across the world in a matter of minutes, and it goes out to all countries. The 2021 numbers, because we had 172,000 deaths in Australia in 2021. We had 162,000 in 2020. and they're 164,000 in 2019. So yes, deaths dropped by 2,000 in the lockdowns in 2020, but then they jumped by almost 10,000 the following year. So we had an extra 300 COVID deaths in 2021. So say out of the extra almost 10,000 deaths, we can explain 2,500, say, as a result of catching up with lockdowns. Having said that, there were also lockdowns in 2021 though, so maybe we can't explain that. But long story short, excess deaths jumped. No, I'll say not excess deaths because that's a model figure. Actual deaths jumped from about 14,000 a month to 15,000 a month from May 2021, about 4 to 6 weeks after the vaccine rollout. And that's concerning. I mean, 2022 had about an extra 30,000 deaths from 2 years earlier, but that's become very easy for those who want to advocate how dangerous COVID was to say, oh, it was COVID deaths. But in 2021, COVID wasn't in the community. So, they need to explain. So it was the increase in deaths was 3 standard deviations from the mean, or a sigma 6 event, which is 1 in 1,000 probability. They need to explain why those deaths jumped, and the jump was in the last 8 months. So if you extrapolate that was probably close to 15,000 deaths had it, gone for the full 12 months. But in the 8 months that we had the vaccine rollout, or 10 months that we had the vaccine rollout, but next to no COVID, deaths jumped. So what was it? It's pretty hard to see how it wasn't the vaccine. We'll put it this way: there's a very strong temporal association with the vaccine. Chantel was the first lady I spoke to, the first person I actually spoke to. She was a very brave lady to come out and speak out, and she basically lost her job over it. But she was immediately ill after getting the vaccine. She was ill for a number of weeks, ended up having a stroke. I say number, about 2 weeks I think it was, and then she ended up having a stroke. Went to hospital, went home again, ill again, went back to hospital, had an operation, had another operation. She ended up on a potassium drip. She struggled to, she was extremely fit beforehand. She struggled to, even be able to walk around the block. I don't think she could even get off the bed for a number of weeks or months, or if she did, she could only do very limited exercise. But yes, when that was after her first Pfizer vaccine, she went to get a second Pfizer vaccine, and I think it's called the Vaccine Safety Clinic or something. And effectively, and she was there with a number of. She went there, but there are other people there as well. And effectively, they were trying to tell people to get the second vaccine. So it wasn't really a safety clinic in how to deal with your injury. It was like, well, we'll sit here and be here just in case you get injured a second time, but you still have to take the second vaccine. Yet again, that's just bizarre behaviour from someone that would have had a very low risk had she caught COVID in the first place because she was fit and healthy, to actually forcing her to get a second jab despite the fact that she was injured from the first jab. And she's one of many that have contacted me. And this is the thing, like early on in the rollout, as I said, a lot of people, oh, it's just another vaccine. Well, it's not another vaccine really, but that's what people were told, right? So they go, okay, whatever, we'll take it. We want to keep our work. We want to go drinking, whatever. And I mean, I was sceptical initially that it would stop transmission, or if it did, it would stop transmission for long. But I figured, well, that many people have been terrified by 18 months of propaganda, c'est la vie, if they want to take it, they can take it. I didn't expect to see the injuries that we ended up seeing. But once it became apparent that people were being injured, and then step 2, it was like, well, so what if you're injured? You're going to have to take a second one, knowing that it's highly likely they could be injured even more. That sort of behaviour was just incomprehensible and reprehensible. Still shocked over it. I'm still shocked today that they're just ploughing on as though, it was all nothing was wrong. It's just incredible what they're trying to get away with.
At the beginning, what was it that made you stand out, that made you step up and say something's not right here?
Well, actually, it was Chantel, who was the first post that I posted on Facebook, and then I posted a few other stories, Sienna Knowles, and I'd heard from another guy in Queensland, a 30-year-old who got the jab Friday night, and then was paralysed down his right-hand side by Tuesday, and then I spoke to him for the first time about 7 weeks after he was paralysed, and same thing as Chantel, effectively, Queensland Health called him to tell him to get a second jab because he was due for his second jab. He said, well, I've been paralysed down my right-hand side from the first one. And they said, well, too bad, you've still got to get a second one. And he had a partner with a young child. His mother, who was on a pension, had to pay off his mortgage. He was on, and
he'd been told about the medical compensation scheme, the vaccine indemnity scheme. That wasn't going to open until the following February or March. So this was late October. So he was going to have to get through the next few months with no income to try and support a family and pay off his mortgage and pay for medical bills. So I was like, this is just insane. So, but they're just 3 stories of many. So within about 2 to 3 weeks, I was just swamped. Like I was getting, I had 20,000 unread emails when I came out of quarantine, because every time we went back from Canberra, we had to go into quarantine. The phones in the office just wouldn't stop ringing, and my inbox in my Facebook inbox was just out of control of people who were injured, etc. And young people too, not, because young people use social media much more than older people. So it wasn't older people contacting me, it was younger people going, fit and healthy one day, and next minute they're, heart pains, neurological issues, paralysis, crazy skin conditions, tinnitus, am I saying that correctly?
Tinnitus.
Yeah, tinnitus, trouble with their eyesight. Well, this isn't, politics is largely ideology. So you argue over the ideology, and then, you go and implement it. Certainly in the federal level, state level, it's more about the service delivery of health and education and police, but I couldn't walk past people being injured. It was that simple. So I did what I thought was right. Santi came with me, and Alex, and it was, it certainly made it a lot easier having Alex with me, and it still is, and Matt Canavan's hopped on board, and then obviously there's other people from other parties that have done it as well. Yeah, look, I just can't sit there and I just heard from so many people that, and I knew what it was like. Politics, it's very hard to go against the narrative as well. It's extremely difficult because you will be piled on, you will have the media insult you, degrade you, call you all sorts of names. And that's part of the problem with politics today, is that anyone that tries to speak up, stick their head out of the parapet, will just get it shot off. The Liberal Party and the people in it who are elected into positions have to deal with the pile-on, the media pile-on. But, the Liberal Party needs to learn a lot of lessons from this. We threw our values under the bus. And Scott Morrison is to blame for that. Greg Hunt's also to blame. I went to see Greg Hunt with these stories of people who were injured by the vaccine, and he basically dissed me. I couldn't walk past that. The Prime Minister's very busy, right? So he needed to rely on Hunt, and Hunt should have picked up the phone. So I'm from the private sector. There's a problem with quality assurance, you deal with it, right? If there's a dodgy, faulty product, you pull it off the shelves. Right? Hunt should have picked up the phone of the TGA and said, listen, I've got a senator here who's been swamped with injuries. There were vaccine injury reports as well. What's going on? You said this thing was safe and effective. And they should have been onto it because they knew that proper tests hadn't been conducted. Now, they justified that because COVID was potentially going to kill everyone, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, I'll give people the benefit of the doubt. It's, you can't, why is it okay to protect people from COVID but not okay to protect people from vaccine injuries? So it's that double standards that we shut down an entire country for 2 years about a virus that that I think exists and was definitely a threat to older people. As all viruses are, respiratory viruses are, but the evidence would suggest that healthy people of working age population had a very low risk from it. Maybe if they had comorbidities, they may, but you don't destroy the strong to protect the weak. It's up to the people to realise that you can't be emotional. One of the reasons why the Liberal Party has been dominated by the wets is because people get frustrated. Conservative members of the party have got frustrated and left the party and joined a minor party. So all that's done is made it, it's become self-fulfilling. It's empowered the wets, and I'm openly going after the wets. I'm not going to shy away from that, because when you stand in the middle of the road, you get hit by a bus. And the turning point for me was last week when a couple of my Senate colleagues crossed the floor on that motion to hold an inquiry into transgender issues for children, and children being changing their sex. That is, I've been contacted by many parents who are concerned about that. Rightfully would be, right? And you've now got this situation where the state and psychologists and doctors are pretty much saying, encourage or saying you cannot question your child if they want to change. Now, I was just contacted by another lady yesterday who sent me a photo of herself and a daughter, and she said, my daughter went through this for about 6 months. She thought she was going to be a boy and wanted to be a boy. And she fought like cats and dogs to make sure, that she never was allowed to take the hormone tablets or anything like that. And she's come through that stage. Right, so it's a couple of years down the track. She says, Mum, I'm so glad you fought for me. Now, with climate change and COVID, people don't understand thermodynamics. They don't necessarily understand, it's enough to know that they're being lied to. Same for COVID.
Definitely.
They just did such a beat up on that.
Yep.
And, viruses are real. People do get sick, and older people are vulnerable, as were sick people, right? That's all true. But this one, with the transgender issue, right, this is an issue that you can't fool people. Not 90% of people, some sort of number around that figure, are going to go, no, right? That's just that's a step too far. And in many ways, like the heritage laws over here in WA, were a step too far as well. It's like, well, I mean, it's quite ironic, because I was talking to a miner this morning. He was going, well, we've been fighting this for 30 years. Yeah, well, I mean, so I've been over here this week on a banking inquiry into why banks are closing branches in the regions, and that inquiry will finish later this year. I mean, I'm going to push for a public bank that also offers insurance, because insurance costs are through the roof. We should have a government insurance office like we used to. Remember the old SGIOs? Yep. We should have home loans that last up to 25 years. This rubbish. I mean, we've got less competition in the banking sector now since the CBA's been privatised than before, when we had a public bank. And to my neoliberal colleagues and constituents out there, we had more competition. We still had private banks, Westpac, ANZ, NAB. We used to have St George, Bank West, Bank of Melbourne. We had the Sander Finance, all these things, and lots of building societies. So, when the Commonwealth Bank was publicly owned, so you still have lots of competition. But I think we need a public bank as well, just to make sure that banks behave themselves. Well, inflation will chew that away a bit, and we've been very fortunate in the last financial year that coal and iron ore has enabled us to get back in the black for the budget. So, look, it is achievable. It's going to come at the price of austerity. It can be done, even if you just paid off 20 billion a year. I mean, that sounds like a lot, because it's actually about 800 in the net debt, excluding the future fund. You could pay it off in 40 years. Well, we've got a future fund, but it's not really a future fund. It's a white-collar retired public servant slush fund for the bureaucrats in Canberra. Right, so that doesn't cover the military. I'm not talking about the military, I'm just talking about the bureaucrats. So I don't like the word future fund, because unlike Norway's future fund, which is owned for the entire population,